Today I'm going to talk to you about something that I've been interested in for a very long time, and that is the origin and maintenance of diversity within lacustrine faunas. And so my co-authors are Andy Boush and Michael Hren from University of Connecticut, and then two of my former students, Gary Motz and Timothy Astrop, and of course always acknowledge funding sources. So what I want to basically do is focus on a few questions here. First, a question that many people have asked is, how did non-marine, and in this case lacustrine faunas, originate? What clades actually invaded through time, and what effect did that invasion have on a clade or a phyla's diversity, and how often did these invasions occur? We also were looking at how clade invasion is related to ecosystems and ecosystem changes through time. And then related to that, how sea level change and plate movement influenced clade origination and diversification. So looking at this is a large macro sort of analysis using multiple data sources. And the genesis of this actually went back to when I was a very wee one as an undergraduate and graduate student. Jane Gray had published a large compendium in Palaeocubed on lacustrine faunas. It was highly influential at the time. And from that work, she published a sort of originations of lacustrine faunas chart, which you can see here. And so this is just first occurrence datum of major lake faunas through time. And so that kind of made the idea kind of possible. So when we looked at paleobiology database, fossil record 2, we also looked at neotoma, and we started our own database of lacustrine faunas through time. These are lake basins through time, and we have about 3,500 references now, over close to 400 basins as reported today. So we have multiple data sources, and I also want to point your attention to this Hydrobiologia compendium in 2008, which was also really informative for learning about modern lake faunas. So if you look at the Metazoan tree of life, and this is Hellenic and Pasmanic, it's a little old, but for this purpose, it simply points out something very critical that is so compelling, at least to me, and that is what we did was we parsed out the differences between marine-only clades, or phyla, versus clades that they have a continental component. So we were calling them CAM for this talk, continental and marine, and MO, marine only. So the colors will be green for CAM and blue for MO throughout the talk. And so what is so compelling is this little fact here, or pointed data source. The number of species that are marine only is about 0.41% of modern standing diversity. And so the diversity, these are the modern standing diversity in parentheses. You might not be able to see it too well in the back. But so basically the take-home message is, for the most part, clades or phyla that can invade or have a component that goes into the continental realm, whether lacustrine or terrestrial, are far more diverse than things that can only stay in the marine realm. And so we think that that's fairly interesting, fairly significant, and it really does open some doors to some other interesting questions. And so one of the questions is, well, why? And we think it has a lot to do with how things osmoregulate. And so in 2007, we published a paper in which this figure appeared. And we think that for the most part, these marine-only clades, these things that can't or don't have a continental sort of subclades or anything that came into the continents, whether in aquatic realms or in the terrestrial, are more or less osmoconformers. Whereas osmoregulation becomes way more important when you're in all these different diverse conditions with respect to mainly salinity. So think about the density difference between a marine salinity versus freshwater or hypersaline. And you can kind of see why this then becomes sort of an important sort of, and the synapomorphies vary across the tree, right? So mainly it's the ability to regulate your oxygen content and flush out all your waste to allow them into different environments. And so the other thing we did was we looked across the tree of life. So this is phyla here, and this is the modern standing diversity that we showed you earlier. And we noticed something very peculiar, and that also supports this, and there is sort of this demarcation or salinity divide between things that are continental marine versus things that are marine only. And so there are exceptions, of course, the Chynodermata, Entoprocta, and the Onchophorans on the other side. But for the most part, clades, and in this case phyla, that can go into a greater range of salinity habitats are far more diverse. And so we are calling this the salinity divide, and we think that this is a testable hypothesis for various groups. You could take basically any type of group and delve into this a little bit further. So we think there is this diversity disparity that exists between these two, the sort of the salinity divide between these two sort of CAM versus MO entities. I should mention here, very important, obviously arthropods are always an exception to everything, right? So if you take the arthropods out, this still remains true. So, so arthropods exclusive, this still remains to be the case. Oops. So, right. So we did take a particular group, the mollusk, and in this case just the bivalves and gastropods, and looked at this a little bit more in depth. And for the most part, the continental and marine mollusks, the CAM mollusks, are more speciose than the marine-only mollusk groups. This is at the superfamily level and also at the generic level. We also note that the clade origination, has been said previously, is predominantly in nearshore habitats. We've known that for a while. And also that taxonomic longevity is greater for the CAM or continental marine faunas versus the marine-only taxa. And the data that show that quite compellingly are these. This is genera. This is pulled from the paleobiology database and also some other sources from our own database. But this is so this is basically a survivorship curve. So this is percent surviving. This is 100%. That's 1%. So the longer the curve, the fewer survive. So in this case, the CAM bivalves have a higher survivorship than the MO bivalves. So in this case, we're positing that one of the reasons why you have greater diversity is also having to do with survivorship. Now, whether that survivorship has to do with being able to osmoregulate, we have not quite made that link. We also looked at the gastropods, and they seem to show the same thing. So again, here's total gastropods. This is survivorship. So percent surviving is 100% and 1% down here. This is our CAM gastropods. This is our MO gastropods. And here you can see higher survivorship for the CAM gastropods versus MO. Now again, these are hypotheses that people can go out and delve deeper and look at in more detail and model things in different capacities. But we think that this is something that does explain some of our data that we're seeing in the larger study. So the other thing we wanted to look at is invasions. So we think that things are invading, and that this is one of the ways that things are establishing themselves in lacustrine environments. So what we're looking at here in this graph is just the phyla and the number of invasions, meaning that the number of things within, this is from our own data set now, the number of times we see something that is a first occurrence datum throughout the geologic record for an aquatic fauna that's in a lake. So this is the number of invasions, and this is the frequency of invasions. And the take-home message here is that invasions occurred throughout geologic time. So there wasn't just one invasion and then things radiated, but things were invading multiple times through geologic time. And oftentimes the things with the highest amount of diversity has the most invasions. We're not quite sure if that's artifactual, but we think that our data are holding on that. But this is something that we'll be looking at in the future. So for the most part, clades are coming in multiple times throughout geologic history. And once a species does come in, or once a base of a clade comes in, it stays in. So that's another kind of interesting thing that we've been able to see. So how are they doing this, and where are they doing this? So we think that for the most part, lacustrine faunas are originating through an estuarine gateway. So we know, obviously, that estuarine space has varied through time due to sea level fluctuations. And so the obvious thing that we're thinking of is that at one time, you had these large river valleys, and they're being flooded, and you're getting a large amount of invasion passively or actively. And then as sea level drops, you get things stranded in different varying salinities in these lakes. So sometimes it could be hypersaline or saline or fresh water. And so we know for one thing that within estuaries, we have different adaptabilities. So we know that within an estuary, we have sort of this salinity wedge, and that things can be actually adapted just into that highly variable space, ecospace within an estuary. We understand that. The linkage between that and actually clade diversification on continents is not quite known to us yet. But we know that estuaries have high influxes of nutrients. They tend to be less diverse than other aquatic environments. We know that we have specialized individuals. We know that there's high turbidity, which might impact their ability to invade. But we also know that multiple times throughout geologic history, we've had mass expanses of estuarine space. And so this is just a reconstruction of Ron Blakey here. This is just geologic time represented this way. And these are from our own lake database here, just showing you various places where our lake basins are associated through time. And the idea here is that estuarine space has increased and decreased based on sea level. So during times of maximum flooding, you have the greatest extent of estuarine space, and you have times when we've had ice-free worlds. We don't necessarily see a latitudinal gradient to diversification, so we're looking into that a little bit more, and that will be hopefully forthcoming. So finally, looking at sea level and origination, what we did here is we took the Hawk sea level curve, and instead of just plotting the curve, we basically just looked at the fluctuations around a mean, which is this big, this black line. So this is geologic time here. So you're either stable or you're fluctuating. So this is actually a plot of sort of greatest amount of fluctuation around the mean. And then this is our, it says originations, but really it's first occurrence datum for lacustrine faunas through time. And so this is, again, this is the mean. This is the standard deviation of the multi-point mean slope of the line of our originations. So here we're seeing that coincidentally, originations were highest when you had highest amounts of fluctuation. So the highest amounts of sea level incursion, sea level fluctuations through time. So here in the Carboniferous, So down in Silurian, Ordovician, Carboniferous, it seems to not hold up in the Permo-Triassic, but it holds up in the Cenozoic and in various parts within the Mesozoic. So we think that there are times of maximum flooded continental areas that coincide with times of maximum originations, first occurrence datum. There does not seem to be a strict correlation between first occurrence datum and icehouse greenhouse conditions, which is also kind of interesting. So to summarize, we think that continental faunas, and this we're mainly focusing on lacustrine faunas, established themselves through estuary and gateways, and they did so by multiple invasions and maximum flooding events when ecosystem space expanded on the shelf margin. We know that there's a diversity disparity between exclusively marine clades versus those that can adapt to continental settings, and that clades invading the continents did so by something we're coining as the Estuary Effect, and did so numerous times, and that global tectonic and geochemical cycling throughout the Phanerozoic influenced continental colonization, and hopefully diversification. We'll be able to see this in further studies through time. So thank you.